The cold watch. The biting wind gnawed at Sergeant Miller's jacket as he and Rex approached the main base checkpoint. A single, anemic floodlight offered the only illumination, stretching the guardhouse and concrete barriers into grotesque, dancing specters. The distant hum of idling diesel engines from the waiting convoy formed a low, persistent thrum, a mechanical pulse against the vast, silent canvas of the desert night. Rex, a sleek, dark form, padded silently beside him, ears alert, nose sampling the frigid air. Miller stroked Rex's powerful shoulder. "Another cold watch, buddy?" he murmured, his breath clouding. Rex responded with a gentle nudge against Miller's leg, his golden eyes, sharp and focused, catching the minimal light. This was their established rhythm, their unspoken pact. Words were superfluous. The first supply truck, a hulking green leviathan, rumbled forward. Miller signaled it to halt, his gaze a quick, practiced inventory of tires, panels, and cargo straps. Without a command, Rex flowed into motion, beginning his methodical circuit of the truck's perimeter. His movements were precise, his focus absolute. He moved like a low-slung shadow, his sniffing an almost imperceptible sound against the engine's drone. Suddenly, Rex froze. No bark, no scratch, no whine. He simply became rigid, every muscle locked, his tail held perfectly still. Then, with deliberate slowness, he settled into a sit beside the rear axle, his unblinking stare fixed on a specific point beneath the chassis. Miller's jaw tightened. This wasn't a typical alert, not the aggressive signal that demanded an immediate search. This was distinct. This was Rex's unique communication, Rex's keen sense. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows as Sergeant Miller approached the checkpoint, the dusty convoy already forming a serpentine line. Beside him, Rex, his Belgian Malinois, moved with an effortless grace, every muscle a coiled spring of readiness. Miller watched him, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. 3 years they'd been partners, 3 years of Rex's unwavering focus, his uncanny ability to sift through the mundane and pinpoint the anomaly. There was the time he'd sniffed out a hidden compartment of illicit fuel in a civilian vehicle, or the time he'd located a missing child in dense woodland, long after human searchers had given up hope. Rex's training wasn't just good. It was perfect, honed by countless hours of drills and real-world success. Rex began his methodical sweep of the first supply truck, his nose a rapid-fire sensor, sifting through the diesel fumes and the lingering scent of canvas. He moved with practiced ease, tracing the contours of the tires, the undercarriage, then the payload. Miller's gaze tracked his partner, his own senses heightened, reading every subtle shift in Rex's posture, every twitch of an ear. The dog worked his way through the second truck, then the third, his tail a steady, low wag, communicating the all-clear. Miller's quiet confidence was a tangible thing, a shared understanding between man and dog that transcended words. He knew, without a doubt, that if something was amiss, Rex would find it. The silence stopped. The rumble grew from a distant murmur to a full-throated roar as the next supply truck, a behemoth caked in desert dust, lumbered towards their position. Miller felt the vibration through his boots, a familiar tremor in the otherwise still night. He gave Rex the almost imperceptible hand signal. The Malinois, a shadow of coiled muscle and focus, launched into his methodical sweep, a blur of motion around the truck's massive tires, then along the lower chassis. Miller watched, his hands tucked into his pockets, the chill of the desert night seeping into his bones. Rex's nose worked with an almost scientific precision, a dark probe against the grimy metal. He moved with a practiced fluidity, his breathing even. Then, just as he reached the rear axle, Rex abruptly froze. His entire body went rigid, a statue of focused intensity. He didn't bark, didn't paw, didn't even whine. He simply sat, his gaze locked on a spot beneath the truck bed, a silent, unblinking stare that spoke volumes to Miller. It wasn't the standard indication, the sharp, decisive alert they drilled endlessly. This was something else entirely. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken meaning. Miller felt a prickle of unease trace his spine. Rex remained unmoving, a sentinel of stillness in the flickering light of the checkpoint. Against protocol. The oppressive hum of the idling supply truck filled the air, thick with the smell of diesel and exhaust. Sergeant Miller's gaze was fixed on Rex, the Malinois, whose powerful frame had gone rigid, a statue of taut muscle and unwavering focus. Rex wasn't barking, wasn't pawing. He was simply there, unmoving, eyes locked on the truck's undercarriage, a silent, unblinking sentinel. "What's the hold-up, Miller?" The voice of PFC Jenkins cut through the night, laced with impatience. "Dog didn't hit. Let's move this convoy along." Another MP, Specialist Barnes, chimed in, "Yeah, we're already behind schedule. Command's going to be on our ass." Miller didn't flinch, his eyes never leaving Rex. He knew that stance. That quiet, unyielding intensity meant something. Protocol demanded an active alert, a bark, a sit, a scratch. Rex offered none of it, yet the message was clearer to Miller than any shouted command. "Hold the truck," Miller stated, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the rising tide of discontent. He saw Jenkins roll his eyes, heard Barnes sigh dramatically. "This vehicle is not moving until I say so." He ignored their grumbling, the shifting of feet, the whispered complaints about a long night and unnecessary delays. Rex, meanwhile, remained frozen, a living testament to an unseen truth. Miller trusted his partner implicitly, even when the rules dictated otherwise. The convoy could wait. Growing tensions. "Seriously, Miller? For hours we've been out here, and now this." Private Davies' voice, already frayed from the long night, grated against the desert air. Another MP, Sergeant Ruiz, nodded grimly. "Command's going to have our hides. The convoy was supposed to be through an hour ago, and the dog hasn't even barked, just sat there." The stifling heat pressed down, making every breath feel heavy. Sergeant Miller's gaze remained fixed on Rex, who hadn't moved a muscle. The Malinois was a statue of focused intensity, his dark eyes riveted to the supply truck's undercarriage. "He doesn't need to bark to tell me something's wrong," Miller said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Rex doesn't make mistakes. Not like this." He knelt beside his partner, placing a reassuring hand on the dog's rigid back. Rex's muscles were coiled tight, an unspoken alarm more potent than any growl. Davies threw his hands up in exasperation. "But protocol, Miller. We're wasting time on a feeling." Miller merely shook his head, his conviction unwavering. "My gut, and Rex's instincts, are telling me to keep this truck right where it is." The truck's engine idled, a low, thrumming counterpoint to the rising frustration around them. Rex, however, remained an unyielding sentinel, a silent testament to a hidden threat. The air thickened with unspoken tension, the standoff hardening with every passing minute. The long wait. The digital readout on the checkpoint's small monitor crept past 0200. Gusts of wind, sharp as blades, scoured the valley, carrying the tang of pine and the low thrum of the idling supply truck. Rex, a stoic shadow, stood motionless by the rig's rear wheels, his concentration absolute, a silent guardian against the biting cold. For hours he'd held this vigil, his gaze unwavering on the shadowed undercarriage. "Miller, it's 0230, for crying out loud," grumbled MP Davies, stamping his numb feet on the asphalt. "The dog hasn't so much as twitched. Command will flay us alive for this holdup." Henderson, another MP, nodded in agreement, chafing his gloved hands. "We need to clear this convoy. It's just a truck." Miller remained unperturbed, his focus locked on Rex. He recognized that profound stillness in the dog, a silent declaration more potent than any bark or gesture. He'd witnessed it before, though never in a scenario so utterly at odds with procedure. "Full power on the spotlights," Miller commanded, his voice slicing through the rising tide of complaints. Davies, Henderson, grabbed the inspection mirrors and the heavy-duty wrenches. "We're going in ourselves. Every centimeter of that chassis." every panel, every hidden space. The MPs exchanged resigned glances but moved to comply, the faint clatter of tools breaking the stark quiet. The protracted wait had ended. The true endeavor was just commencing. A hidden secret. The unforgiving glare of the floodlights exposed every scratch and smudge on the supply truck's olive-drab paint. For what felt like an eternity, the soldiers had meticulously probed every accessible crevice, their gloved hands scraping along dusty metal, flashlights cutting through the gloom beneath the chassis. Sweat beaded on Sergeant Miller's brow, but his gaze remained fixed on the undercarriage, then to Rex. The Malinois stood motionless, a statue of focused intensity, his eyes locked on a specific section of the truck's framework. Not a whimper, not a twitch, just an unwavering stare that fueled Miller's stubborn conviction. "Sergeant," a voice cut through the drone of the idling generators. Private Jenkins, covered in grime, pointed a gloved finger at a section near the rear axle. "There's something here. Feels different." Miller crouched, his own flashlight beam joining Jenkins's. Almost imperceptible, a hairline seam ran along what appeared to be an ordinary crossbeam. A faint click, almost swallowed by the night, and a small, cleverly disguised panel recessed inward, revealing a dark, shallow void. The air hummed with a sudden, sharp tension. Miller felt a quiet sense of triumph bloom within him, a silent nod to Rex's unerring instinct. The dog, as if sensing the confirmation, shifted his weight, a deep, satisfied sigh escaping him. The unexpected find. Sergeant Miller grunted, the metallic tang of sweat sharp in his mouth. The last stubborn screw finally gave way, clattering onto the concrete. He carefully pried open the panel, the hinges groaning in protest, revealing a cramped, dusty cavity within the chassis. Rex, who had remained a statue since his initial silent alert, let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, his tail giving a single, slow thump against the ground. Miller shone his tactical light into the darkness, illuminating a small, plain wooden box nestled deep inside. It was no bigger than his palm, surprisingly light as he lifted it out. The MPs who had been grumbling moments before now leaned in, a collective breath held. Miller's gloved fingers traced the smooth, unvarnished wood. No latch, no lock. He pressed gently on a seam, and with a soft click, the lid sprang open. Inside, nestled on a faded velvet lining, lay a single item. It wasn't a weapon or a package of illicit drugs, or even a bundle of documents. It was an antique silver locket, tarnished with age, its surface etched with delicate, almost imperceptible scrollwork. Miller picked it up, feeling the cool weight of it in his hand. It wasn't what anyone expected, least of all him. A quiet triumph settled over him, mixed with an unexpected pang of curiosity. Rex nudged his hand with a wet nose, his dark eyes fixed on the gleaming silver. Report and reward. The fluorescent lights of the precinct flickered as Miller typed, each key press a decisive click against the late-night quiet. His report detailed Rex's unusual behavior, the rigid posture, the unwavering stare, and the subsequent discovery of the locket hidden within the supply truck's chassis. He described the intricate carving, the faded photograph nestled inside. He felt a quiet triumph, a validation of his gut instinct. "Miller, what is this?" Captain Davies' voice, gravelly from too many cigarettes, cut through the quiet. He gestured at the draft report on Miller's screen. "A locket? Seriously? It wasn't a weapon, wasn't contraband. No incident report required. Wave it through, forget it, and let's move on." Miller's jaw tightened. "Sir, Rex didn't just sit. He knew. Something was there, something out of place. It's a deviation from standard procedure, a successful one." Davies scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Deviation or not, the convoy's clear, everyone's happy. Don't make mountains out of molehills, Sergeant. Don't file it." But Miller did. He signed the digital form, a subtle defiance against the unspoken command, and watched the status change from draft to submitted. He knew it was a symbolic gesture. By the time the morning shift arrived, The digital file was undoubtedly closed, relegated to the archives without a second glance. Later that night, the clatter of kibble hitting a metal bowl was unusually loud. Rex, sensing the significance, devoured the heaped portion with a satisfied grunt. His tail gave a single, slow thump against the concrete floor. It was a silent acknowledgement, a shared victory between man and dog, a reward more potent than any medal.